All right, welcome back, everyone. Looking forward to giving you a fun episode today. Now, I actually have a really interesting guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and kind of what you do?
Sure. My name is Will Nitze. I'm the founder and CEO at IQ Bar, and we're a brain and body nutrition company, predominantly selling bars, but we just moved into hydration and we'll move into coffee soon as well. So we're kind of platformizing ourselves as a brain and body nutrition platform.
That's awesome.
We're called IQ Bar. I don't know if
IQ
I said
Bar.
that up front.
Yeah, yeah, you did. You did. It was awesome. Like one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on is I love hearing people's stories about how did you find this path? How did you get into this? How did you find your entrepreneurial spirit and start this project, start this company?
Yeah, I mean, it was a confluence of a number of forces. I had a job that I was not crazy about, candidly. I didn't know what I wanted to do out of college, and I took a job in software just sort
Hmm.
of by default. I didn't want to be a banker. I didn't want to be a consultant, which a lot of my friends were doing. So yeah, I got applied to a bunch of jobs. Got one at an offer at a software company. Took it and sold and marketed software to oil and gas companies for 3.5 years out of college. But did not like it. I was not passionate about software. I wasn't passionate about oil and gas. But learned to get good at Excel and PowerPoint and running meetings and writing emails and how does a company work and all that stuff. But yeah, so that was one force, me not liking my job. And then I got really into nutrition at that time. And personal reasons, I had a bad diet and I felt really lethargic and had brain fog and headaches and things like that. And I quickly realized that was diet related. And so I shifted to what was pretty much a paleo diet, whole food diet, low carb, and everything got better. But what was most interesting to me is the cognitive benefits of cutting out carbs. Pretty much is the biggest shift. And then I also the third force was I wanted to. Well, there's four forces. The third force is I wanted to start my own thing eventually anyway, and I wanted to own it from tip to
Yeah,
tail. Like be able to create the product myself and sell it and market it. And then the last thing I was really interested in the brain. So I loved psychology and neuroscience. I studied those in college. And so anyway, all that kind of merged together and I was like, maybe I'll make a brain food. Like, does that exist? Is a packaged brain food in existence? Really wasn't. And so, yeah, that was the genesis.
that's awesome, man. Now, how that's really interesting because and that just gives me these questions because you got that entrepreneurial spirit that started coming up and you wanted to figure out how to own and create something from end to end, right? But when you were starting out with your ideation process, what were some of the things that you started did you sit there and go, hang on, there's going to be some real challenges here? What how did you start looking at what it might take to put this company together?
One of the nice things about consumer goods is that there's a lot of like micro moving parts, but there's not a lot of macro moving parts. At a high level, you have to make something
Yeah.
and you need X amount of money to do that, and then you're going to sell it for Y price, and that's going to net Z dollars, and it's all very like configurable on a piece of paper and in your brain. Of course, there's like infinite nuance once you get into any one of those topics, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that step one is just like what are the big buckets, and then honestly, to start figuring out really what your roadmap is, go find five people who've done it, who are like 2 years in or 2 years ahead of you, especially if they're in your category. So for me, I learned I wanted to make a bar. And so I thought, well, are there entrepreneurs in Boston? And there were a couple. So I hit them up and asked them a bunch of questions. And to their credit, they gave me a bunch of answers. Like that's one of the other things about CPG is consumer goods is everyone's pretty collegial and will just shoot you straight and help you. Like it's kind of a funky thing. Like competitors help competitors in a way.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and then you talk to five people and you get a roadmap and then start executing on the roadmap and you'll learn you need, let's say you find a manufacturer. Well, they tell you you need these 10 documents and go find the 10 documents. And then you're like, all right, what else? And like, well, we also need this. And just sort of like compartmentalize all of the micro steps and then just knock them down one by one until you get there.
That's awesome. And like that's something that I think that's something that often will, so say a person is sitting here at point A and they want to get to point Z, right? And they sit there and look at that process, and people get scared of getting to B. You know what I mean? It's like people shut themselves often, or sometimes will shut themselves down because getting to, point Z is, this incremental shift. And, again, there isn't the roadmap. But that's a really interesting information gathering style to go speak to these five people. Was there any interesting advice that you received in that time that you didn't expect?
I don't know. I received so much advice. I mean,
Right?
I don't. I think people should be really, really careful about advice. A, soliciting advice, and B, once you get advice, what should you pay attention to, and what parts of any given piece of advice should you pay attention to? More or less, I would block out all advice other than like someone literally making the type of product I wanted to make who was did it recently, let's say 2 3 years ago. And everything else is kind of noise because macro dynamics shift,
Yeah.
fundraising markets shift, go to market viability shifts.
Hmm.
Like when we were coming up, Amazon was still, a far cry from what it is today. It was still kind of, in retrospect, like in its like adolescent years, kind of, and now it isn't. And
Yeah.
so, if I were to give advice to someone starting now, based on like how things were when I started, it would just be it's not useful advice because the landscape has shifted so much. But it only shifts so much, like let's say 1 2 3 years. So you want that recency and you want the specificity, and you just want to feel the person's smart and successful and capable. That
Right?
too. But no, I just any advice I didn't that wasn't fitting that mold, I more or less ignored.
That's awesome. How did you was it just that you had this internal idea of what you wanted to accomplish, or what was the criteria for what was important and what was not? I mean, how did you kind of delineate the two? Or what, maybe not important, what was relevant?
Well, there's the obvious stuff like, is it a bar company? Well, it's probably
Yeah.
relevant. It doesn't have to be exactly what you're doing. There's different categories of knowledge, right? So, like,
Yeah.
accounting just is right or wrong. It's very black and white, and there's a good way and a bad way to do it. And so, it doesn't really matter that it's a bar company or a whatever company. It's someone who knows it and can do it cost effectively is an asset, and you'll take accounting advice from that person. And finance more broadly is kind of like that. And even fundraising is kind of like that. You can broaden your aperture of people to seek advice from. But then like when you get into like the fundamentals of like product and go to market and strategy and things like that, it gets more important that it gets specific. And then just look at results. Like, did this person grow a brand? Did
Hmm.
they sell a brand? Did they and it, advice from people who like let's say went under is also incredibly useful, but just know that that's just that's a data point. That's something to
Yeah.
consider when they give you advice. It's like, well, this didn't work out for this person, but honestly you want to get to a place where you're generating your own advice
I love that.
and you're looking at empirical data yourself firsthand, and you're doing a bunch of micro tests and making decisions based on them.
I think that is definitely an interesting point to get to, and it's really interesting that you say to like look at it yourself, because at the end of the day, what was it? There's no two paths that are the same. No two companies that have the same trajectory. No two, you know, overall strategies that work for the same or for two different entities. And so, it is extremely personal. As your company started growing, what were some of the challenges that you faced, and what were some of the solutions that you found for those challenges?
Oh man, there's so many. There's like down to the tactical, like
Mm,
you know, a wrapper didn't seal right. That'd be like a super tactical, like that's a big challenge. You're running like 200,000 bars and your wrapper doesn't seal. Like how do you solve that? You have to solve that right then and there on the factory floor and sort of triage all the issues and blah blah blah. Then there's like higher level, more strategic stuff like how do you structure your team? You know, what do you insource versus outsource? You could hire someone to run Amazon or a team to run Amazon, or you could have one person run Amazon and oversee a third party who manages Amazon. You know, there's just, and then there's like finance, like fundraising is always very hard, especially now in a tough market. So there's so many different like flavors of challenge, and you have to tackle all of them.
What's your favorite part of the whole process of running a business? What is the part that really, when you wake up in the morning, this is why you keep doing it. This is what you find fun or enjoyable.
Just owning your destiny. Like some people don't like accountability. I do, as long as it's self accountability. I don't know. I like being my own boss. That's a huge one. I don't generally like taking orders.
Yeah,
Um, it's harder, net, it's harder than having a boss and being in a company, but I like it more. I'd rather, like, even if it's 2x more work, I'd still rather do it because, it's your work, it's your baby, you created it. Like, there's a sense of pride infused in everything. It's hard to explain because it's yours, um, that you just don't have in a company. And company, you're a mercenary or a hired gun. There's just a different feel to like everything, like sending an email, developing a product, like everything when you're an entrepreneur is infused with that, like, this is my thing. If I do a good job, my baby will become this whatever grown up that's a household name. I think that's my favorite part, is just like the quality to everything you do, it being different.
I like that. Well, I love the way you described it, owning your destiny. I love that idea of the ability to kind of shape your own path, because a lot of people go along for the ride, and no judgment on that. That is their, maybe what they're vibing on, what they're enjoying. But for a lot of people, and I think for people that have an entrepreneurial spirit, the ability to kind of chart their course is is an interesting thing. There was what was it? I was watching this documentary, and it was talking about some early, naval exploration. The idea of being able to kind of go where you wanted to go and see what was out there. Certainly you had to have provisions, you had to prepare, but the idea of there not being roadmaps, the idea of people being able to embark and journey and look at a direction that was, how do you say it? Like, again, uncharted, that they could chart their own course. I mean, I used to think about some of the exploration done. What was it? The period that really was interesting to me was when they were trying, like Shackleton, when they were trying to get up to the North Pole. There was not really. They had this idea about where they wanted to go, and they, or the South Pole as well, and they had these people that were just a little bit adventurous, a little bit nuts, that wanted to accomplish something. And they set out with as much preparation as they could, but even still, there wasn't a success was in no way guaranteed. And there was, at that point in time, there was no rescue that was coming for you. It was just simply this idea about, embarking on this journey and seeing what they could accomplish and seeing if they could get there. That's always fascinated me, that journey.
Well, yeah, that's a big tenet of entrepreneurship, is be comfortability with the unknown.
Yeah.
Like, you have to get comfortable with unknown, like ambiguity,
Yeah.
and lack of certainty of what's going to happen tomorrow and what's going to happen a year from now. Like anything could happen. Whereas if you just have another job, it's like, I kind of know where this ship is headed. And if I do this, I'll get this raise and this bonus. But with entrepreneurship, it's like anything can happen. I mean, especially at the early stages, which is good and bad, right? It's high highs, low lows.
Yeah. There was I actually liked how our interview started because one of my favorite things is the idea of adapting. So for people who the video wasn't rolling yet, but we had to adapt to some challenges in lighting. And that to me is every single day that I run my own business, every single time in my career in film, like people are like, does everything go as planned? And I'm like, never, never in my career have things. You have a plan, and you have a plan that you can adapt, and you still get through your overall project. But at least with filmmaking, it's the art of improvisation. You literally have to be thinking on your feet, and every single time that you prep, something weird will happen.
I watched, there's this good Netflix series called The Movies That Made Us. You ever watch that?
So good. So good.
But that's what, and that, you talking made me think about that, which is like literally them making the movie and it going wrong. And every single movie goes wrong in 30 different ways. Like the latest one I watched was Forrest Gump, and it's like, they don't want to shoot the scene where he's running across America because it's too expensive. But then they send some lady in to like fix it, make sure they don't shoot that and keep them on budget. But then the lady falls in love with the scene. And so she secretly helps them film it all. And everything just is a circuitous route to what ends up being this incredible movie. But it's just so choppy and chaotic in between.
There was uh, this post that I read about why people should get back to, why we should have kids studying how to paint and draw in school, and why artwork is important for kids. And the idea, it was different than I thought it was going to be. And when I was reading this, I was like, well, kids like drawing. That's what it's all about, right? Teach them to be creative. And it was like, no. Letting kids draw and paint when they're kids teaches them how to deal with messing up and making huge mistakes. My daughter came home the other day, and she went into her art class, and she was drawing an animal, and suddenly there's just this giant like antenna coming out of its head. And I was like, what happened here? And she's like, oh, I thought we were going to draw something else. And I did that. And I was like, well, what did you do with it? And she's like, well, I turned it into a tree. And I was like, that's good. You had to adapt. And I think that skill of being able to adapt on the fly is something that, to me, is really, really important in entrepreneurship, and at least something that a lot of people have talked about.
I think that's why a lot of type B people are drawn to it, because I think like a type A person it would go crazy. Because you are constantly adapting. Like things are going, you plan, and then your plan gets blown up.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just have to be able to deal with that, replan, and re-execute. It's like a bunch of micro pivots or micro plans that aggregate into a trajectory versus one plan well executed, especially in the last 3 years, right?
Yeah,
COVID
right.
happens, and think about consumer goods. The way people buy things is like completely changes and then completely changes again. Everyone was anticipating e-commerce would fast forward 20 years, and then it didn't. Everyone went back to stores. So it's like, that's so crazy because it's so fundamental to your business. That's your go-to-market strategy. Like literally, where am I going to sell products? And you're getting jerked around along the most fundamentally important like vector of your business
Yeah.
every year.
Where I live in actually Southeast Asia. I'm calling you from Vietnam right now. And I've lived here on and off for the past 20 years, 22 years. And driving in this city is interesting because when you drive, um, the roads here are in a state of perpetual chaos. This is the best way I can describe it. Um, when you turn left, it's a hair-raising task that you kind of aim towards oncoming traffic, and you and a group kind of work your way through oncoming traffic. There's no left turn lights at all, so it's a wild experience, right? And like you said, if you're type A in traffic here, you will have a really hard time. It is because people will stick to their path, right? So say I want to get from where I'm at in District 5 to District 2. There's about 1,000 different ways that I can get there, right? There's probably the most common way that would be the main way, but that's the route everyone takes, and it can be crowded at times. It can be the road can be just having construction or something. And early on, while living here and driving here, I came up with this method of driving, and it was just whatever happened, I kept moving. So, say I come to a light. Well, if there's a red light that's a long red light, but things are flowing to the right and I can turn right and still reroute, then I'll go that way. And it was kind of just the idea of like not stopping the momentum, keeping the momentum, but yet going with the flow at the same time. And it was just this idea of being adaptable and constantly rerouting. And so, because there is this interesting dichotomy that you chart a course as an entrepreneur, you chart your direction, but then you do have this series of realignments that you're constantly making, and so it's just this interesting. I feel like there's two sides. There is this power and freedom to chart your course, but you are always always still reacting to little things. And
Yeah, it's sort of similar to what I was saying a couple minutes ago. It doesn't mean you don't have you have macro goals. So let's say you want to
yeah,
grow 100% every year. Well, there are 50 ways to grow 100%. And you actually don't care which way you end up doing it. You just need to grow 100%.
yeah,
And so when, let's say, you have a initial plan, but pretty quickly stuff starts not panning out over here and then like really panning out over here and blah blah blah, right? Like you miss on every leg of the stool, but you just want to make sure the stool is standing like at the end of the day.
yeah.
And so you definitely do have macro goals that you want to hold yourself accountable and stick to. And it's actually quite helpful because it forces you into a sort of a rubric or a mold, and you don't let yourself off the hook. Let's say like, oh, recession hit or whatever, but that doesn't let you off the hook. You still have to grow 100%, and that just means that people are going to shop at Walmart, Walmart more than Whole Foods.
Yeah,
Okay, how do we adapt into servicing our Walmart locations the best we possibly can, or whatever the example is? But you still have that umbrella set of goals that you need to keep yourself accountable to. It's just you're a bit agnostic as to the specific route that you take to get there.
I like that. Well, earlier on you said to be careful of advice, but I'm gonna ask you to, if you could go back and give yourself advice, before you started this whole project, give yourself a couple pieces of advice or one piece of advice. What advice would you give yourself if you were able to go back to the version of you that was just starting out down this path?
I would say a couple things: be product obsessed or service obsessed. Whatever you're selling, be obsessed with that, like down to its DNA. And there's so much there. Why people are buying it, who can afford it, is it priced right? Do you have enough gross margin? Do you have enough net margin? Why are you different? Are you defensible? Can you build a moat around this product or service? But just like really fundamentally understand it, and you should fundamentally understand it. Not you go pay, like, if, let's say you're a non-technical person and you go pay I don't know, a Russian developer to develop an app. Like, I always hated that model because it's like you don't know the guts of very thing that you're selling. Like
Hmm.
that's crazy to me. So just be product obsessed. And another big one would be make sure your life maps to what will be required of you.
Interesting.
So entrepreneurship, obviously, this isn't like a novel statement, but is incredibly hard and time consuming, and you can't take vacations, and you can't hang out with friends, and you're going to lose touch with people, and maybe your romantic relationships are strained, and just go in eyes wide open and be willing to make all those sacrifices because that you just can't stand not making this thing, or but it is, I just think it is worse than even people think it is. I think the myth of the glamorousness is people are kind of have sussed that out, that it's not that glamorous, but even still, I think people way underestimate what is really required. It's hard to explain. It doesn't really do it justice to say like you work a lot of hours. It's like imagine just having something always on your mind. Like there's a Magnus Carlsen. I don't know if you know, he is a chess player. He's the best chess
Yeah, yeah,
player in the
yeah, yeah.
world, and he's always playing chess in his brain. Like always, it's never off. Like he could be having a conversation with you, and he's going over a game in the back of his mind. So that's kind of how I think about like entrepreneurship is like it's always on. Like there's always chess pieces moving around in your business, even when you're sitting down for dinner with your college buddy. And so be okay with that.
The, that Magnus Carlsen story reminded me. I cannot remember who it was, but there was, I believe, it was a famous psychologist that wanted to do a bit of an experiment on their family. So they started the kids out to play chess, and they said, if we invest a certain amount of energy and time, can we turn our children into chess champions? And there was one moment where he came out to the kitchen in the middle of the night, and his daughter was sitting there, and she was sitting there with chess pieces in front of her. And he's like, "You need to be sleeping." And she's like, "I can't. They won't let me." And it was just like she so lived, breathed everything chess that there was no moment of her life where she wasn't in like the game. Even at a young age, I think
Yeah,
this child was around 12, 13. There was no moment where there was not a scenario running. And I think that's something that I haven't heard described with entrepreneurship, but it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense that you have to breathe and live and eat your product. It has to be part of, or you will, if you don't know that, you're gonna quickly learn that.
absolutely.
What are some of your goals heading into the next couple of years? What would you like to really accomplish or learn, or what are some things that you would like to kind of embark upon?
I have a lot of goals. I mean, grow the company as much as we can. Um, that 100% was a real target. We try to double every year, which is crazy. It's just such fast growth. Honestly, we'd like to sell the business in the next couple of years. Um, so there's a whole dog and pony show involved with that, finding the right potential acquirers and making sure we would fit in their portfolio and blah blah blah. Emerge as a leader in as the leader, the preeminent leader in the brain and body nutrition space. Kind of become synonymous with brain and body nutrition, edible and drinkable, not like supplements, not pills, but like food and drink. Slow down a little. I've been, hard charging to the max for 5 years. Like, can I take a beat? Hopefully. Yeah, those are the big ones.
It's awesome, man. What would you, if you had a new path unfolding in front of you? You had An investor comes up and says, "Here's X number of dollars. What try something new? What would you dive into? What would your new journey be?"
Man, so hard to say. It's so like dependent on where my headspace is at that time.
Right.
I would be really thoughtful about it. Like in retrospect, I was like quite capricious and spontaneous and all that with IQ Bar, my current company, which is great. Actually, I think that's actually needed to get just start doing something, and then
Yeah.
it'll evolve into whatever. I think I would be more thoughtful at that point. I think I would be more thoughtful. And I don't know though. Could be tech. I'm fascinated by a lot of things. I'm fascinated with tech, consumer goods. I like teaching things in general. Might be fun to like be an adjunct professor for a bit. Like man, it's like whatever I'm obsessed with at that time. But it could span. I'm not the kind of person who's like, I'm just going to make new products. Like I
Yeah.
may not. I'll probably hang out for a little bit
Yeah.
at some point, have a couple kids, figure out where the hell I'm going to settle. But I'll be back at it. I'm that classic person who's just spent 2 days on the beach and I'm
Yeah.
itching to get out of there and start doing stuff. I really like media too. I really like the intersection of media and products and services. Like I
Yeah.
like this movement of people becoming their own media entities,
Yeah.
kind of like what we're doing right now,
Right.
and that the power has shifted to individuals versus institutions in terms of getting messages out. So I would like to, I don't know, maybe do something in that realm of creating a information dissemination engine that maybe is married up with selling products. Maybe it isn't. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
like owning the information distribution system. I like that concept. Could be a lot of things.
I like what you're saying too about, as you look toward what you're building, you have to think about what's going to take up. It's going to take a lot of your time. That's why one of the things that I'm working on right now is I have a channel for my daughter. And early on, one of the things I noticed was during lockdown years, there wasn't, I had to homeschool. And, I had to be, I was the one that was doing all the education for my daughter. And we had, a
Hmm.
long time that we were, without schools here in Vietnam.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I found is there just weren't a ton of resources for that were good that I could share with my daughter, and so I started making my own videos with her. And I taught when I was earlier in my career. I taught as a teacher. I taught English when I was living in Vietnam. And so I kind of pulled back from some of my old education days and started thinking about, well, what curriculum would I really like for my kid to watch? We started cranking out videos, and you know what it was? It was fun. It was really fun to be able to make videos with my daughter, and the idea of, like, as I built that, it was something that we could do together, and that was exciting for me because it was something that aligned with. It took and takes a lot of energy to make that content, but it's also something that is in the process of it. I can enjoy it and spend time with family at the same time, which is a double win. Now, if you could give one last piece of wisdom to anyone listening today, not advice, but if someone is looking to start their own entrepreneurial path, what thoughts might you share with them?
I think I would just really understand the why. Like tactically, it's all the stuff I said earlier. Once you determine the why, focus on product, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
But more important than that is like why are you do you want more control over your destiny, over your life? Do you hate having a boss? Do you not like taking orders? Do you have the skill that you just feel you have to exhibit in some sort of service or product or whatever, and that it's eating you up that this thing isn't in existence and you want to be the person to do it? Do you care about your legacy? Like all viable. I mean, even money. Like maybe you want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
People poo poo that, but that's a viable, like,
That's a viable thing.
it's not for me or anyone else to judge like what drives you. You know what drives you, and also what sustainably drives you. So not what makes you happy. You know, what has made you happy since you were a kid?
Yeah.
Maybe you love competition, and that's just charted its way in different manifestations throughout your whole life. Cool, that's sustainable, or at least it appears it is. So, what sustainably motivates and drives you? And do that, like center what you're doing on that or one of those forces. Because otherwise, you're just going to give up. Like, it's not, short termism is never going to work. It's just going to be too hard. So, find something that'll keep you going even when it's not fun and you don't want to keep going.
I like that, man. I like that. Find something that'll keep you going even when you don't want to keep going. Because it has to, you have to have a purpose there. You have to have that map that is guiding you.